an honor.
And it's an honor to lift our voice and sing
To the living God.
to the living God.
No one can deny.
No one can deny
That Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ is the Most High.
Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go.
I like that video. In that, it's all beautiful, right? It's one of the first hymns of the church. You know, we sing a hymn every week. Can you imagine the old church in caves and hiding, going from house to house, but singing hymns? And see, the purpose of the hymn back then was to encourage them through the race. Their race was nothing like our race. And we've got some tough races. And my guess is I can bring chairs up on the stage. We can go through some confessions. We can talk about some challenges. And everybody in here, we'll all leave out here crying. But listen, let me tell you about this early church who would have used Philippians 2 as their hymn. They would have been being persecuted like nothing we have never seen before in America. They would have seen their relatives being killed because of the love they have for God. They would see them being beat. Sometimes death was lucky. But if you pay close attention to the end of that video, and this is the part that after I saw it, it just shook me to my core. God's going to come back. He's going to exalt Jesus for everything he did. He's his son. He's going to exalt him. And when he does that, every knee is going to be required to bow. It won't be a thing where you can kind of decide, right? You won't have to determine if you're in the closet or out of the closet, or if you want to or not, if you believe or don't believe. It won't be about if you've got time to worship. You will have to bow. And not just you, me, and every knee. It says every knee will have to bow. And every tongue will have to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. But the most amazing part, and that's pretty awesome. I can only imagine that. If that happens in our lifetime, can you imagine what that would be like to happen in your lifetime? If it doesn't happen in your lifetime, it'll probably be an even greater event because you'll be dead somewhere. And next thing you know, you'll be then bowing and declaring. Imagine that. But the most amazing part about that entire video is that we have the opportunity right now. We have the opportunity right now to bow down on our knees and to worship Jesus right now. We can worship God right now in the midst where you are right now. You don't have to get down on your knees like I am, but where you are right now, you can worship him. You can declare right now that he is Lord. You can say thank you right now. Thank you, God, for allowing your son to come down and take my place. Because I never could have done what he did. I never could have emptied myself out. I never could have allowed myself to be beaten and killed for other people. I never would have given my life for people that I don't know, for sinners that I will never know. But Jesus did it. And every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. But I'm not waiting on that day. I'm not waiting. I'm on bending knee today. I worship you, Lord. I worship you with my voice. I worship you with my hands. I worship you today, God. I can only imagine the emphasis of that hymn on those people during that time. They'd be somewhere in a cave or way out back hiding in fear of their lives, but on their knees worshiping God. And guys, we've got too much freedom. We have too much time. We've got too many resources not to pause and worship God. Not a little worship, not a little prayer, not a few words. I'm talking about extravagant worship. That thing I saw y'all doing from the back of the church while the praise team, they did a wonderful job. Everybody who came up here, Dr. Lyons, Christian, every single person, came up here with the Spirit of God inside of them. We've got the opportunity to lift Christ up. That is our mission. We're going to lift him up so that he can do the drawing, he can do the saving, he can do the restoring. How do you lift him up? You worship him. How do you lift him up? If you're not willing to bow and yell and scream and go and tell everybody about him, who will? How will he be lifted up? How will he be exalted on earth if we don't do it? So, we've been going through this series. The series is on running for the prize. You know, Paul tells us that we're all running a race. When you ask God to come into your heart, that day you gave your hand to the church, you gave your heart to God, you became a Christian that day, a disciple of God, you began running a race. And Paul likens that race to a long race. One of the things that we know about long races is that they can be difficult. I remember I ran track when I was in elementary school. There was a lot of people who wanted to run sprints. Everybody wanted to run the 40 and the 200, and a few people wanted to run the 800. Nobody wanted to run the 1500. Teacher had to beg. I think you can do this. I think you got everything it takes. How long is it? You got to run around this thing, you know. No, that's okay. I'm not interested in running that. Matter of fact, I've been studying racers since we've been doing this series. And I came with this keen observation that I want to share today. As I've studied racers, I have learned that there are two kinds of racers. There are racers who run short distance and racers who run long distance. Y'all don't look surprised. But it's an important thing, because as I've been doing my study and I've been looking at racers and trying to understand racers, in particular trying to understand how they train, their attitudes and those things, I began to see two distinct types of people who emerge. There's a difference between Usain Bolt and the Kenyan that won the marathon. And I say the Kenyan because if I said his name, you would not know him. It is not popular to be a marathon runner. It's very popular to be the fastest man in the world. The way you train to be a marathon runner is very different than the way you train to be a sprinter. Sprinters are muscle people, so they're lifting weights, they're running hard, they're lifting weights. Marathon people, they may lift weight, not. Hey, have you seen the marathon group? They look like us, some of them. They don't look like you? But because of the way you have to train in order to run a sprint, we begin to see some differences in the characteristics and how these people look. Sprint runners are stronger, they're more muscular, their attitudes are different. There's a difference in the attitude. Have you ever met a marathon runner? A very meek, laid-back person? You would never know they ran marathons. You're talking to this person, you've known them for 10 years, and then in the midst of a conversation about hardly nothing, they mention that one time they ran a marathon. You're like, what? But there's a difference between a marathon runner and Bolt. I mean, he runs his race and then he's doing something like this, right? Because he's got the muscles and he has the celebration. He gets instant gratification. He runs for 4 or 5 seconds, and then the crowd is cheering. But the marathon runner, he's running through cities, and by the time he gets back, folk are gone. But I say all this to say that in order for us to be the Christians that God wants us to be, we've got to put on a marathon mentality and take off the sprinter's mentality. We've got to change our attitudes, guys. We've got to change the way we think about things. Sprinters care about how they look. They care about what they wear. They care about endorsements. They care about winning at all costs. How many of you know that attitude will bring you a lot of hurt throughout your Christian race? So I want to talk to you today is from the topic of having a winning attitude. Having a winning attitude, because we all want to win. That's where Paul starts off. He says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24, he says, we all ought to be runners trying to win the prize. And what Paul is referring to is a Greek word, treka. And treka is the word that we take the word track from. Now, treka speaks directly to running, but it speaks to running in the sense of having the attitude of a runner. It's not anything about the physical attributes of a runner, but it's about what they have inside. I know Nike had a campaign many years ago where they would always say, it's 90% in here, 10% here, 90% in your mind. And so what I began to understand as I began to look at these two types of runners was that there was a winning attitude for each. And what Paul is telling us by using this word treka is that in order for us to win the race, we've got to think like a marathon runner. We've got to understand that this is going to be a long race, that there'll be some challenges that will come up, that you'll be trying to do the right thing, but people will come at you with bad intentions, that bad things will happen. Attacks will come out of nowhere. God will test you sometimes. Even when you're doing exactly what he had you do, you'll still go through some tests. That if you want to have that family that God showed you, that it's going to take a lot of hard work. You just won't get a pill or something and take that pill, What he's doing is he's trying to prepare the people of this culture to understand that the very thing that they're signing up for, the thing that you walked up to the front when you gave your life to Christ and you gave your heart to the church and you told everybody and your mom and everybody that was there that you're going to serve God, that thing that you were signing up would be one of the toughest, longest marathons. It'll start on that day and it'll end on the day that you go into the ground. Paul tells us that we have to have the right attitude in order to do this thing, that we're not even capable of doing it. It doesn't matter what you have, who you know, how connected you are, how many Facebook followers you have, how many Twitter followers you have. It doesn't matter. None of those things mean anything. The only thing that matters is an attitude that you've got to be prepared. I got a question for you. Do you have a winning attitude? Do you have a winning attitude? Do you have the attitude in which it takes to win this race that God has put you in? Fathers, I'm asking you a question. Do you have a winning attitude to be a Christian father? Mothers, I'm asking you a question. Do you have the winning attitude that it takes to be a Christian mother? Married folks, I'm asking you. Do you have the winning attitude that it is going to take to keep your marriage together? Because one of the longest Christian races that you will ever run on this planet is marriage. And I love my wife. But marriage is a long marathon, and it takes two people running with the right attitude in order for it to happen. Do you have the right attitude at work? Do you have the right attitude with your family members, with your sisters and your brothers and your parents? Do you have the right attitude in your community? Let's take a look at Paul's writing. Paul writes to us in Philippians 2, verses 5 through 8. He clearly explains what it means to have the right attitude. Let's look at verse 5. It says, make your own attitude that of Christ Jesus. Listen, he starts way at the top, doesn't he? He doesn't say, be like me. He doesn't say, be like mama. He doesn't say, be like dad, be like your cousin, the one that was successful and got the big house. He doesn't say, be like your uncle or the guy down the street. He doesn't say, be like Beyonce. He says, you need to set a standard. And that standard for your life doesn't need to be how low you can go. And see, for too long, too many of us have let a line become our standard. If I send this text, I won't be crossing the line, right? If I cheat on my taxes, that's not really crossing the line. You'd be surprised at how many times I talk with young people and they're asking me, what is that line? How far can I go on my first date? How far can me and this guy go? And we not be crossing the line. How nice do I have to be to my wife in order to be a good husband? How hard do I really have to work in order to be a good employee? What's the line? Help me find the line, because what I want to do is I want to settle somewhere as low and closest to that line as I can, so I can hold my head up and say that I'm a good Christian because I didn't go below that line. And what Paul says is erase the line. Don't ever look down. Don't try to play down to a certain level. What Paul says is look up, let Christ be your line. Have the attitude of Christ. I want you to be just like Christ was. Not the uncle, not the auntie, not that person that you admire, not Martin Luther King, not the person from the past that you saw, not the president, not Obama. I know there's a name thing that's going on now. A lot of kids now being named Barack. I understand, I get it. We stay in a society where we see people and we aim for them. But what Paul is saying to a culture in which there was a God on every corner, there was a king that was constantly declaring himself as God. There were mayors who were taking on some type of a deity form. Everywhere they looked, there was something that was trying to put itself above God, and people were shooting to be like these people. And what Paul says to this very confused place, and that confused place could be us today, guys. He says, don't be like the world. Don't be like your folks, the people that you look up to, the people that you see on TV, because you never understand. You never know what is really going on in your hero's life. You have no clue. He says, instead, I want your goal to be like Jesus. I want you every day of your life to try to wake up, to be like Jesus. To when you get out of the bed in the morning, the first thing that you say to God, even before you get out of bed, is, God, make me over. Take me out of me and insert your son into me. Give me the spirit. Give me the love. Give me the patience of Jesus today. That's the attitude that I want when I'm in a situation that I can't control and I want to control it. He said, well, in that situation, do what Jesus would do. But what would Jesus do? Let's go a little bit further into the word. Look at verse 6. He says, who existing in the form of God did not consider equality with God as something to be used for his own advantage. And what he's referring to, if you go and read in John says, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was God, and the Word was with God. We believe as Christians that Jesus was God, the Son of God. He is fully God and fully man. And when this problem happened, when Adam made this mistake, when prophet after prophet came and could not get the people to change, when David, a man after God's own heart, failed, lost his family, made mistakes, had a man killed, he looked around, he said, we've got no choice. We need somebody to come forward and go back and fix this. And Jesus did it. He gave up his deity in form. And he comes down to earth to save us. And the way Paul says it, he says it in such a way that he could have objected. He could have said no. But he didn't take the fact that he was the Son of God to mean something that was greater, that would have given him an advantage. He didn't say, Dad, don't make me do this. I don't know these people. I don't trust these people. They may not follow me. They may not come. This may not work. I'm too big for this. I'm too high for this. But he surrendered all. He submitted. He surrendered. Verse 7a says, instead, he emptied himself by assuming the form of a slave. Not only did he empty, not only did he take off his deity, but he takes on the form of a slave. The entire time he walks the earth, he is constantly at the beck and call of fishermen and prostitutes, drunks and tax collectors. He is constantly going around finding the problem and fixing it. He is serving the entire time he walks on the earth. He walks up to a person that needs help. I'm blind. Okay, let me give you sight. He walks up to a person that can't hear. Oh, you need help? Okay, let me give you hearing. He goes to a place where people need food and he feeds everybody. 5,000 people, women and children not included. He serves. He becomes a slave. It says that taking on the likeness of men. Verse 7b says, and when he had come as a man, in his external form, he humbled himself. He didn't just come as a man, because a man is a very proud individual. You don't have to be a God in order to be proud. You know, we've got men who walk around who are prouder than any God we could ever serve. Not only did he become in the likeness of man, but he conquered the likeness of man, because the likeness of man is flawed, because we actually believe that we are gods within ourselves. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. That's why we so easily serve other men. That's why we so easily serve our own intentions. That's why we so easily do the things that God will have us not do. And that's why it is so hard for us to completely surrender. I'm talking about completely surrender. Give it all to him. Everything. He says he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. Not only did he humble himself, but he became so obedient that he's in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's sweating blood, literally, and he's praying and he's talking to the Father and he's saying to him, God, I don't want to do this. Oh, I know what I said up there. This is hard. Will you just take this cup from me? And then he says, but not my will. But your will, God. How many times has God asked you to do something and you said, I can't do it. I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose my family. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose the relationship. Will you take this cup from me? But not my will, God, but your will. Your will. That's a few things that we learned, and I want to just talk to you about specifically what a winning attitude is. I think the first thing that we see about a winning attitude is that it is one that values humility over status. It doesn't care who's the smartest. It doesn't care what race you are. It doesn't care if you're a man and you my wife and you're supposed to submit to me. It doesn't care anything about that. It doesn't care anything about status at all. But it is a love and attitude of humility. I like the way Paul talks about this. He says in Ephesians, he says, wives, submit to your husbands. Then he turns around and says, but husbands, submit to your wives. He says, employees, submit to your employers. Oh, but by the way, those that employ, submit to your employees. Children, submit to your fathers. Oh, but fathers, submit to your children. He tells us that we need to have a submission contest. Can you imagine what the relationships in your life would be like? I'm talking about with your parents, with your children. What would your work relationship be like if you submitted to your boss and your boss submitted to you? What would your marriage be like if you submitted honestly, not just in the things that you feel comfortable giving up, because we all got some stuff that we don't care about giving up. I'm going to let you win on this, baby. You got this, baby. Yeah, you got it. But on those things that you feel like you have status above, I'm smarter, I went to school longer, I'm stronger, I'm taller, whatever the case may be. When you're dealing with your children, I'm older. You know that stuff that we say. Can you imagine what your relationship with your children would be like if some way or another we figured out a way through humility to raise them versus the thing that was done to us, being bullied, being told what to do all the time? But not only does a winning attitude value humility over status, but it also gives and serves freely. Jesus, he gives it all. He gives up more than any of us could ever give up. He gives up his deity. And he comes to serve. But not only does it value humility and over status and gives and serves freely, but it always does the right thing regardless. Doesn't matter what the situation is. It doesn't matter if you might lose your house. It doesn't matter if you may lose your job. You don't cheat. We don't take shortcuts. We're Christian. We don't do the thing that we know that we should not do. We don't text inappropriately. We don't flirt inappropriately. We always do the right thing regardless of the situation. And the final thing that it does is it sacrifices for others. It gives. I'm not talking about the stuff that you can't wear anymore. I'm not talking about the stuff you don't want anymore. It gives from a place of lack. It gives to others. I want to talk to you for a second about obtaining a winning attitude. Now, we know what a winning attitude is, and I went back and I asked you some specific questions about your attitude, whether you had a winning attitude in your marriage, at home, with your children, at work. Now that you know what a winning attitude is, there may be some gaps. Because we're taught to deal with our problems like a sprinter's taught. We want to be stronger. We want to be tougher. We want to be harder. There's nothing about humility in the way that we've been taught to deal with problems and with people. Nothing about humility. Nobody has taught us to have humility in those situations. So how do you obtain that? Let's look what Paul says in verses 12 and 13. He says, so then, my dear friends, called us his friends. Ain't that nice of him? Just as you have always obeyed. Not only in my presence, but now even more in my absence. I like that because he says, not only did you obey when I was around, These folk weren't just playing church. These folk were being sacrificed. They were being beaten. You know why they were being sacrificed and beaten? Because they were having real church. You know, Halloween is a day. Today is Halloween. You know, it's very cool for everybody to go and dress up like something that they aren't. But I'm not convinced that Christians are not dressing up in a costume every day. I'm not convinced that Christians are not waking up all around this country and throughout this world every day putting on their Christian uniform, walking out to their car and saying some verses. And, you know, like the sprinter, you know, the sprinters like to have stats. They learn the verses and say the right things, but never doing the right things. He says, but not only were you obeying God in my presence, but you were also obeying God in my absence. And then he gets very serious. He says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. He said, I just told you all this stuff that Jesus had to go through. Listen, somebody's son had to die. Somebody's brother, somebody's nephew, somebody's cousin, somebody's neighbor. He had to die. He had to be beaten. He had to be put on a cross. He had to suffer. They call them nails. They were spikes. They put spikes, like railroad spikes, through his arms and through his legs, and then they stood him up and allowed him just to suffer there. Every breath had to be complete agony, because anytime you breathe, you're going to pull your body up. That's going to pull on those wounds. Come down. You're going to pull your body up. You're going to come down on those wounds. Now, all you had to do was walk up to the front, or from your seat, all you had to do was say, I give my heart to Christ, I accept you into my heart, and you had salvation. But what he wants you to understand is that salvation was free, but it cost somebody something. Somebody had to go through a lot in order for you to take advantage of the free salvation that you have. And what he's communicating to us today and to the church back then was, we can't play with this thing. This is serious. Somebody died for this so that we can have this relationship, the same relationship that we can't even carve out 15 minutes a day to study word. He says we should work out our salvation with fear and trembling. Don't do bad things because you are fearing and trembling about the salvation that Jesus died for and gave you. He says, for it is God who is working in you, enabling you both to desire and to work out his good purpose. I like that. Because what he's telling us is we can do this. You know why we can do it? Because God's involved. Because it doesn't matter what you've been through, doesn't matter how hurt you've been, doesn't matter what you didn't learn or what you witnessed when you were growing up. Right now, God can move into your heart. If you would just submit, if you would just give it all to him, I mean every piece of it, if you would just allow him to completely take control of your marriage, with your children, at work, if you would just give it all to him, he's got everything that he needs, and he can put exactly what you need in order to do what? Work out his good purpose. All we got to do is surrender. All we got to do is take on the attitude of Christ. It's an attitude in which we have humility. It's an attitude in which we're humble. It's an attitude in which we're willing to sacrifice. It's an attitude in which we're ready and willing to freely give and to serve. And he says, this is how you get to the race. This is how you make your marriage work. This is how you make the relationship with your kids work. This is how you make things work at your job. And there is not one relationship, not one place, not one organization There's not one thing that you have to commit to that wouldn't be changed completely if everybody would just take on the attitude of Christ. So I want to talk to you very briefly about the benefits of that winning attitude. Paul talks to us in the last two verses, verses 14 and 16. He tells us about this benefit. He says, do everything without grumbling and arguing. Isn't that amazing that 2,000 years ago, folks still acted the same way? 2,000 years ago, and they didn't have internet. They didn't have anything going on like that. They barely had hardly no written books, nothing. People still argued. People still grumbled. People still complained. He says, let's do this. Let's run this race without doing that. Well, why don't we be married without complaining to our single friends and our other married friends about how bad marriage is? Why don't we be a man, an honest man, a good man, and not complain about how hard it is? Yeah, it's hard. But nobody needs to hear that, especially young men that you mentor. They don't need to know how hard it is and how terrible it is. How about those young women that are being mentored? They need to understand that the Christian race is a race that is winnable. That you can run it, that we can make it, that it is challenging, but it's great. And it's something that we would never trade in for. Verse 15, he says, so that you may be blameless and pure, children of God who are faultless in a crooked and perverted generation. Did he write this last week? Isn't it amazing that back then they didn't have, internet stuff going on, bad pictures going on, but they still had a generation that was perverted? See, that pervasive spirit, it can operate without technology. It can operate without any types of modern day technology. For many years, we've been battling this persuasive spirit. It goes all the way back to Sodom and Gomorrah. And every generation after that has had to battle the exact same battle that we're battling right now. Back 2,000 years ago, even among these Christians, the goal was to be Christians that could pull people away from pervasiveness, perverted spirits, and all types of social ills. He says, among whom you shine like stars in the world. That's the benefit. Listen, if you will submit to God completely, if you will make that attitude of Christ your mark, God will present you faultless. He'll use you to bring others toward Him. You'll be living out the mission of this church. You'll be uplifting Christ through your daily actions. And there's nothing bigger that I can ask from you. I can't ask anything bigger from anybody in this room now other than that they take on the attitude of Christ, that they represent Christ within this community, within every interaction, that they constantly go around with that spirit of humility, that they sacrifice for others, that they give freely, that they run the race with dignity and with integrity. Like Paul said earlier, don't just be good when you're here on Saturday. Be good Sunday through Monday, Sunday through Friday. He says, hold firmly to the message of life. Then I can boast in the day of Christ that I didn't run or labor for nothing. That's your reward, right? It's a life of fulfillment. It's a legacy. You can be there in the day of Christ. You'll be there with Paul. You'll be there with all the people who sold into you. You'll be able to stand proudly. You can say, I ran the race. It was a hard race. I got tired sometimes. Some days I didn't know if I could make it. They didn't have a Gatorade bottle big enough for me. I didn't realize that everything that I was doing was going to result in a life of a lasting legacy. But I'm so thankful that God gave me this opportunity, not just to live this life, but to worship him during the process. I want you to just imagine for a second. Just imagine how much different, even the greatest relationships that you may be in. Just imagine for a second how much different those relationships are going to be as you apply the attitude to Christ just to your own life. Don't worry about what they do. Well, just imagine in those deepest relationships, in those marriage relationships, in those relationships with your children, even in those work relationships, how much better your entire world is going to be as you take on the attitude of Christ. So I want to leave you with this. My goal is to have the attitude of Jesus Christ every day of my life. I want to challenge you. Every morning when you get up, the very first thing that I want you to do is I want you to ask God to give you the attitude of Jesus Christ. In every relationship that you're in, I'm talking about especially during those times when it becomes very challenging, when you feel like you're going to lose it, when you feel like you're going to go off on somebody, whenever something in your mind says anything like putting somebody in their place, I want you to ask God to come inside of your heart and place within you the attitude of Christ. Now, there's a couple of people now, I don't know who you are. There's a couple of people who have strained relationships. Once again, we could, everybody, we've all got something. But God in this season, he wants to restore those relationships. And somebody had that relationship inside of their hand when Quentin asked you earlier to hold it and then let it go. Somebody had a marriage, somebody had a relationship with a parent or something to that degree. And what God wants me to tell you today is he wants you to change your attitude. Because the difference in your altitude, how high you can go in that relationship, is all based on your attitude. That he wants to come into your heart and come into their heart. He just needs a conduit in order to do it. And the way that he's going to do it, and he will restore it, is through you changing your attitude to the attitude of Christ. It's time for us to surrender all to him. It's time for us to put every relationship, every problem, every condition, everything that we go through, anything that causes us pain, it's time for us to put it all into his hands. And see, when we give up all that stuff that we've been carrying, all that stuff that we've been doing, all the hard work we've been trying to do to make the marriage work, to make the job work, to make the kids work, all that stuff, we'll have a lot of free time. And what I want you to do with that free time, I want you to be one of those bowing knees. And one of those tongues that will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. To God be the glory.
Here we stand in the presence of our Savior.
It's an honor
And it's an honor to lift our voice and sing
to the living God.
to the living God.
No one can
No
deny
one can deny
that Jesus
that
Christ
Jesus Christ